For a long time I wanted to sew super simple but cozy pants for the colder season, and I finally made them, and I know I made you wait a little bit for the tutorial, but here it is. Super easy to sew pants for any beginner. For the cozy pants I'm sewing in this video, I used my Rory Pants pattern, but I adjusted a few things to the original pattern, so I wanted to show you here how I did this. As you can see, on the inner and outer edge, so left and right, I added around 1 centimeter, just because I wanted it to be a little bit cozier and wider and comfier. And on top I added the length that I would usually cut separately as a waistband. I did not want to sew a separate waistband onto it, so I've just added it to the original pant leg. And then I would just flip it over and use as a waistband. So for me that was 8 centimeters, but here's also a good step to make it wider if you want to. And then of course for the front pattern piece I did almost the same, but I did not add left and right the 1 centimeter extra because I thought it's enough to add a little bit on the back. I did not want to have pockets for this pant version, so I did not cut it diagonal where the pockets would be, but I've cut it straight, and then of course added again the length for the waistband. After we're done cutting how we want it, I'm gonna put the back pieces on top of each other. They're cut mirrored with the right sides facing each other, and I'm gonna pin the crotch seam. After I'm done with this, I'm also gonna do the same with the front pieces, which are also cut mirrored, and again pin the crotch seam. And by the way, I can really recommend this magnetic pin holder. I always use it and I cannot imagine without. When you're done pinning both crotch seams together, you're gonna sew with the seam allowance that is in the instructions written. So that is 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch, which is basically the seam allowance for the entire pattern. I basically always recommend to press the seams open after sewing them and before overlocking them. So that's what I did here with both seams, and then they look like this, nicely pressed open. And then I'm gonna overlock the seam. If you don't have an overlock, you can also use a zigzag stitch, or most sewing machines also offer an overlock stitch, which you can also use. After that, I'm gonna put the front piece on top of the back piece, right sides together. And then I'm gonna align the sides. As you can see, the back piece is of course a little bit bigger because our back needs more space, but we can align it anyways. And then also the crotch seams you're gonna align perfectly, and then the rest down to the bottom you're also gonna pin. Here you can see I pinned already the sides, and then I also pinned the middle down to the bottom. Then I just sew with the normal seam allowance, all seams, so the outer edges and then the inside seam. And then I press the seam open and overlock again. Once I'm done with this, we want to also overlock the entire top edge. This is actually optional. If you don't want to overlock the top edge, you can also later, when we fold it over, double fold it so it doesn't fringe and it doesn't open up. So then, as you see, I folded open. I folded 4 centimeters open because the waistband we did 8 centimeters and we're gonna fold it in half, so 4 centimeters, and we're just gonna sew it all around. First I actually pressed it so it's really nice and neat, and now I will sew it, but I will leave a little gap for later. So before finishing the seam, we will leave a little gap around 3 to 4 centimeters because we needed to put the elastic band through it. So you will take your elastic band. Mine is I think 3 centimeters wide. You can go anything like, yeah, it does not need to be exactly 3 centimeters. It can be also a little bit bigger or thinner as long as it fits into the gap. So I put a safety pin on one end, and then I pull it through the waistband, and then once I'm done with this, I'm gonna overlap the elastic ends and sew with a zigzag stitch. When sewing the elastic together, I like to sew multiple times back and forth with the zigzag stitch just so it's extra strong, it doesn't open up quickly. After that, we're gonna put the rest of the elastic into the waistband gap and we can stretch it a little bit, and then of course we need to also sew this gap closed, so I'm gonna stretch it like this and sew with the same edge stitch as before. Because this stitch is going to be seen, I try to align it as best as I can with the seam I did before. The next step is going to be optional, but I recommend it if you struggle sometimes with the elastic band flipping over. So it's recommended to sew again on top of the elastic band to prevent it flipping around and turning and twisting. So you can sew 2 rows or 1 row in the middle or 3 rows. And make sure that you actually sew onto the elastic band. If your elastic band is much smaller, like just 2 centimeters wide, it can happen that you sew and the elastic band is not actually under the sewing needle. So I decided to sew here once close to the outer edge and one time to the other edge of the waistband, so 2 rows on top and on the bottom to make sure it doesn't twist, and also I like the look of it. That's how it looks for me now, but it can look different depending on how you do it. Here you could then also add a drawstring if you would want. If you want to add drawstring, please look at my other Rory Pants tutorial. And now we're basically done with the tutorial. Only thing left is to hem the pants. And you can overlock the bottom edge again and just fold it 1 time over, or you can double fold it how I do it. And as you see, you can choose however wide you want the hem to be. You could make it very thin and narrow. I made it here, I folded first like a centimeter over and then maybe a little bit more than a centimeter, like 1.5 centimeters, and I pressed it and sewed with an edge stitch again. It's also a good time to try the pants on before sewing the hem and deciding that maybe you want them shorter or longer, and then cutting some fabric off or also adding some fabric. And finally, when you're done sewing the hems on both leg ends, you're done with this tutorial and you got yourself super simple, cozy pants, which are really, it's so easy to sew and they're so cute. I really hope you liked the tutorial and see you next time.